Ever wondered what it feels like to drink a song that rewires your soul and discover the singer might not have your best interests at heart? What if the rainforest itself were a hospital, a hunting ground, and a courtroom all at once? Welcome to Shipibo country, where ayahuasca boils in moon-dark malokas, Kené patterns map entire cosmologies, and every shaman's rattle can heal or hex. In the next 2 hours, we'll slip past glossy retreat ads and dive into a living history of rebel healers, predatory imposters, and a river that keeps score. From mythic serpents etched on pottery to algorithms decoding flood patterns, this journey traces a culture fighting to protect its medicine while the world tries to bottle it. Dim the lights, steady your breath, and follow the Taboo historian into the heart of a story that still sings beneath the noise of modern life. Night falls quick in the upper Amazon, and by the time the stars burn through the mist, you can almost hear the river breathe. On its black mirror surface, the constellations ripple into fractal shapes that look uncannily like the labyrinthine Kené designs painted on Shipibo pottery and textiles. According to the elders, those designs are not decorations at all, but maps of the universe. Each line echoes a strand of the cosmic anaconda Ronin, whose luminous skin once sang the world into being. To trace a Kené is to follow the path of creation back to its source, one curving scale at a time. For well over 1,000 years, the Shipibo Canibo people have lived along the Ucayali River in eastern Peru, stringing their stilt villages through seasonally flooded forests and narrow beaches of brilliant white sand. Today their population hovers around 35,000, but the river remains the spine of daily life. Highways are water, canoes are cars, and every bend in the current carries an origin story. Outsiders first recorded the Shipibo only in the 17th century, yet oral genealogies weave far deeper, remembering migrations, floods, and star paths that never made it into Spanish chronicles. At the heart of those memories lies Ronin. Shipibo storytellers describe her as the mother of ayahuasca and the keeper of 4 layered worlds: water below, forest at the midline, sky above, and a crystalline realm beyond the stars. When she first rose from the depths, she gifted human beings with 2 tools. The first was ayahuasca, a vine that lets mortals see the invisible architecture of existence. The second was Kené, the geometric code of her own skin, so that humans could remember what they had seen once the visions faded. Even now, many Shipibo painters begin a new cloth by whispering a short chant and placing a drop of piri-piri plant juice in their eyes, sharpening inner sight so the serpent's patterns emerge unbidden. Guiding those visions are the Onanyabo, people of knowledge known to tourists as shamans, but adamant that their real title not be lost in translation. An Onaya's training is brutal. Months in jungle isolation, strict diets, celibacy, and the ingestion of a parade of teaching plants whose spirits test every shred of resolve. Apprentices learn to sing Icaros, sonic threads that can stitch torn souls back together, or, if misused, unravel them. Only a handful ever reach mastery, and even among those masters the line between healer and sorcerer remains thin. In 2018, more than 100 veteran Onanyabo gathered in Yarinacocha to form a union and publicly reject spiritual extractivism, warning that the sudden global appetite for ayahuasca could corrupt the very ceremonies foreigners seek. Fear of that corruption is nothing new. In pre-contact times, a gifted Onaya might be celebrated for curing snakebite one week and suspected of sending spirit darts the next. Power invites awe, but also paranoia. Spanish friars labeled all such practices diabolical and spent centuries trying to bury them beneath crucifixes and catechisms. When the friars failed, rubber barons tried a rougher erasure. Between 1880 and 1915, hundreds of Shipibo were whipped, enslaved, or simply disappeared into remote tapping camps. Whole villages emptied, leaving only the echo of a paddle against the hulls of rubber launches heading downriver toward Atlantic markets. Survivors clung to their songs like buoyant wood, a cultural life raft in a sea of violence. The 21st century opened on a paradox. What the church condemned and the rubber lords crushed is now advertised worldwide as a path to enlightenment. Dozens of retreat centers line the jungle roads around Pucallpa, promising detox, trauma release, and instant communion with Mother Ayahuasca for a fee. The influx of cash has financed schools, solar panels, and outboard motors in Shipibo territory, yet it has also seeded darker stories, fake shamans, psychedelic snake oil, and cases of sexual abuse perpetrated during ceremonies when participants are most vulnerable. The Yarinacocha Declaration calls out these dangers by name, insisting that any true exchange be founded on consent, reciprocity, and respect for Shipibo's self-determination. And so we arrive at the threshold of a tapestry woven from equal parts beauty and brutality. In the chapters ahead, we will follow the Shipibo from legendary dawn to rubber dusk to the neon glow of jungle retreat centers. We will sit beside apprentices shivering through solitary dietas, listen to grandmothers humming Kéné into clay, and confront the shadows that coil around any great source of power. This is not a quest for lost innocence, but a reckoning with living complexity, a story where an ancient serpent still sings, the river still remembers, and the next verse is being written right now in a chorus of human voices and forest spirit. Night settles over the Ucayali the way silt settles into its slow-moving channels, patient, inevitable, soft as a lullaby. Clouds drift apart until the Milky Way lies naked above the palms, a bright seam of light reflecting in the river like a second sky turned upside down. From the village verandas, the last cook fires glow, women stack clay pots painted in swirling lines, and dogs curl into warm bundles beneath the hammocks. In that hush, when even the crickets seem to whisper, an elder's voice lifts, low and rhythmic, calling everyone inward toward a memory older than anyone present. She begins with the story of Ronin, the cosmic anaconda who glided through the darkness before there was earth or sky. Ronin sang creation into being, each note a luminous thread that wove fish, fruit, and starlight together. As she moved, the serpent's scales captured the melody in white on amber designs, intricate labyrinths that later generations would call Kéné. When Ronin wished to share her gift with humankind, she slithered down through the layers of the unseen world and offered two treasures. The first was a vine, bitter as copper and strong enough to lash a canoe, whose brewed essence could pry open the doors of perception. The second was the pattern on her skin, so that after the visions faded, people would remember what harmony looked like. The listeners, half visible in the orange glow, know this tale by heart, yet never tire of hearing it. They touch the woven cloth that warms their shoulders and trace its zigzags, evidence that the old song still breathes. Grandchildren lean closer, wide-eyed, to catch the next details, how the first Shipibo woman brewed the vine with red-veined leaves, how she drank and found herself inside Ronin's dream, how the serpent taught her to convert cosmic sound into painted form. The grandmother pauses here and lets silence do some of the storytelling. Fireflies blink in the dark. Far off, a night monkey hoots. Then she lowers her voice. Life, she reminds them, is the point where vision and vibration touch. Forget either half of the equation and the world unravels. The children shiver with a mingled thrill and fear, sensing the weight of the lesson. Soon they will sleep, but the idea that sight is sound in another register will linger like smoke in their lungs. By dawn, the household stirs. Men shoulder palm wood paddles, bound for fishing grounds in back eddies where piranha cluster under sunken logs. Women hurry down vine-lashed ladders, skirts brushing cool air, to draw river water in calabash gourds and rinse yesterday's cassava mash. Chickens scratch for termites beneath raised floors. Canoes, narrow as shadows, nudge away from muddy banks and aim for channels mapped more by memory than by any compass. A visiting stranger might see only simple subsistence, but every act carries a quiet precision learned over centuries. When to plant sweet plantains because the moon is swollen, how to predict the flood stage by reading the tilt of the constellations. Presiding over this choreography is the Onaya, the person of knowledge. Outsiders call him, and sometimes her, a shaman, though the word fits about as well as a child's tunic on a jaguar. An Onaya is healer, historian, meteorologist, philosopher, and at times reluctant diplomat. The calling can arrive unbidden. An adolescent who survives a lethal snakebite may wake fluent in songs no one taught. A widow might dream of luminous vines that coil around her heart, insisting she apprentice. However it begins, the road forward is brutal. A youth accepted for training departs the village at first light with only a hammock, a machete, and a small packet of saltless plantain chips. Deep in the forest, he builds a lean-to beside a stream and enters the dieta, weeks or months of isolation. Food is boiled fish without spice, water drawn before sunrise, sex forbidden, words spoken seldom. Each dawn, the apprentice drinks a tea of whatever plant the maestro prescribes, Bobinzana to strengthen the heart, Ajo Sacha to sharpen intuition, or astringent chulachaki, Katahwa said to reveal one's worst fears. The plants invade his dreams, sometimes gently, other times with teeth. If he passes their tests, fevers, hallucinations, cascading doubts, he earns the right to drink the ayahuasca brew under the maestro's watch. Ceremony nights arrive like electric storms, mats, the Maloka's packed earth floor. Babies are rocked to drowsiness with sugarcane pulp. Dogs are tied outside to prevent them from absorbing stray darts of spirit. The brew is served in cups carved from calabash, thick and brown, smelling of rust and jungle floor. Torches are snuffed, plunging all into darkness so black it seems to pull at the skin. Somewhere in that void, a rattle shakes, dried leaves whispering in perfect tempo with shuddering hearts. The maestro begins to whistle, the tune so delicate it feels etched onto the air like moonlight on water. Then come the songs. Icaros, melodic architecture meant to navigate vision space. Listeners feel the notes as touch, threads sliding across their chests, rearranging something unseen. Under the brew, the apprentice sees Kene glowing like constellations on the interior walls of existence. He may encounter ancestors carved from starlight or jaguars cloaked in human tongues. When nausea rises, he purges into a clay bowl, convinced he is vomiting centuries of grief. The maestro, meanwhile, sings and smokes mapacho tobacco, pulling invisible darts from his charge, sealing wounds with perfumed breath, steering the night away from reefs of madness. By dawn, thin blue light pools under the thatch. Participants sit in a semicircle around the maestro, pale but alert, and recount what they witnessed while the elder translates symbols into advice. Make peace with your brother, stop hunting the white-throated monkey, plant a cedar for every tree you fell. But power cuts both ways. In Shipibo ethics, every healer is a potential sorcerer. Whether song heals or harms depends on the singer's intention. A curandero insulted or underpaid might send a virote, an invisible dart, lodging sickness into a rival's gut. Parents caution children not to mock the solitary widow muttering on the riverbank. Her anger could invite nightmares of hissing vines winding through your bones. Social equilibrium rests on reciprocity. Praise the healer who helps you, compensate him fairly, and no dark song will follow you home. Yet community life tempers fear with festivity. Harvest celebrations stretch across 3 sunrises, fueled by fermented manioc beer, ladled from clay cauldrons, glazed with spiral patterns. Teenagers engage in playful wrestling matches that sometimes end with teeth loosened, but reputations secured. A 12-year-old girl, newly menstruating, is led at dawn to bathe in the river, then wrapped in a palm fiber belt as elders serenade her passage into womanhood. Laughter, music, and story spin together until distinctions between trance and dance blur. Seasonal rhythms are tutor and tyrant both. When rains come, the forest transforms into a cathedral of water. Canoes skim between half-submerged trunks, hunters spear sloths stranded on canopies, fishermen haul nets sagging with dorado silvery in the dim light. Floods can rise as high as a grown ceiba overnight, swallowing maize plots and depositing freshwater stingrays in yards. Yet the same deluge fertilizes gardens with silt and strands turtles ripe for the taking on new-formed sandbars. Adaptation is the first law. Observation, the second. For centuries, that pulse defined the Shipibo world. Outsiders arrived only in ripples, Andean traders bearing bronze axes, stories of distant cities whose stones were stitched with gold. Courteous but unimpressed, Shipibo chiefs accepted the gifts, then sent merchants home with Kene-painted pottery and a polite warning to respect river spirits. True disruption rode in under sailcloth printed with red crosses. Franciscan friars floated upriver in the 17th century, planting wooden crucifixes like stakes against a patient darkness. They preached of a singular heaven and a singular hell, called Ayahuasca the devil's vomit, and urged chiefs to burn their rattles. Some villagers complied from curiosity. Others played at conversion, hiding ceremonial tools beneath earthen floors and chanting their icaros in whispers. When a friar smashed a maestro's drum in a public square, the shaman retaliated with song, summoning clouds of biting flies, so dense cattle bled from nostrils and novices vomited bile. The mission dissolved, its statues cracked under humidity and neglect. Still exchange seeped through the cracks. Steel machetes made felling a ceiba easier. Glass beads replaced jaguar teeth in necklaces. Yet each adopted object was adapted. Blades were etched with Kene to harmonize their spirit. Morning greetings now included both Christ and the pink river dolphin. To the Shipibo, syncretism was not compromise but braid, multiple strands stronger together than alone. What tethers this complex weave is women's artistry. Every textile is an archive: births, floods, epidemics, marriage alliances, medicinal recipes encoded in symmetric whirls. Should missionaries confiscate songs, women weave the melodies. Should smallpox silence elders, patterns preserve genealogies. A grandmother can run her finger along a cloth edge and recount 3 generations of history, 2 bouts of measles, and the year the river rose higher than any canoe pole. Underlying all is a worldview that seats humans within a parliament of beings. Fish vote with their absence when nets are overused. Thunder spirits debate the ethics of striking a tree near a school. Before cutting a palm, a carpenter asks permission aloud, not superstition, but etiquette in a living household. Western naturalists call this animism. The Shipibo would simply call it common sense. Near dawn, a young apprentice named Inkia swings in his hammock, listening to frogs croak like broken flutes. Tomorrow he walks upriver to begin a dieta with a plant no one in his lineage has yet mastered. He is 18, afraid, yet alive with purpose. Somewhere beyond the tree line, under leaves wet as copper rooftops, a vine coils patiently. It has waited centuries to share its dream. When Inkia drinks, he will step onto a path traced long before missionaries, rubber barons, or tourists had names for this place, a path lit by the same designs Ronin etched on her skin at the dawn of time, still glowing just beneath the surface of everything that breathes. The year is 1885, and the afternoon sky over the Ucayali looks bruised, purple shot through with bronze where the sun tries to burn its way out of storm clouds. Villagers watched in silence from doorways and half-finished canoe hulls, unsure whether the groaning hulk was a machine or a predator wearing metal skin. Smoke curled across the water, settling on thatched rooftops and hanging there like a curse, too heavy to rise. For generations, everything that moved on the river had glided, paddles dipping, fish flashing, occasional sails flapping like lazy herons. Now, thunder made of gears and fire refused to drift away. 3 days after anchoring on a sandbank, the strangers finally saw their hosts. A cordon of young Shipibo men poled narrow canoes forward, paddles held upright the way spears once were, blades gleaming with fresh resin. Their question needed no translation. "What does your monster want from the forest, and how much will it cost us?" A rubber entrepreneur with a stiff collar and an accent thick as boiled syrup declared he had come to civilize wild trees, to coax their sap into wealth for the Republic, and, he insisted, for the natives, too. 2 Franciscan friars promised salvation, waving paper crucifixes that fluttered in the damp breeze. In exchange for machetes, calico, and beads, the newcomers received polite permission to build a station inland. Permissions can be revoked. Iron promises seldom are. At dawn, the camp lumbered to life with shouts in Spanish, German, Quechua, and the metallic throat-clearing of axes against trunks. Latex bled down the sides of rubber trees into tin cups lined in perfect rows. A Shipibo man learned quickly that 40 taps before midday meant bread for his children. 39 meant a debt he would never pay off. Overseers tallied quotas with the calm indifference of bank clerks, then cracked whips whose braids whistled overhead like wasp wings. Quinine fought the fever, but nothing cured the loneliness of clear-cutting one's own cosmology. Nights ended with tired eyes staring at kerosene lamps, the smell of smoke clinging to skin, and dreams that replayed the daytime wounds in reverse, as if the forest itself were editing the memories. The Onanyabo tried to absorb the blow the way a cedar bends under storm wind. Ceremonies shrank to urgent triage. 1 cup of ayahuasca instead of 2, and Icaro shortened from 6 verses to 3. Shamans raised leaf rattles over backs striped by whips and sucked invisible shards of humiliation from the chests of men who could no longer look their wives in the eye. Plant spirits offered counsel, some compassionate, others furious enough to split sapling trunks. One maestro reported hearing Bobinzana murmur that latex was the earth's marrow and that taking too much would cripple the forest's spine. He relayed the warning to a foreman who laughed, calling it story-time medicine. That same foreman crushed his foot beneath a fallen limb the next week, and the rumor traveled faster than the infection. Violence escalated as profit margins thinned. When ESAP ran low, a new policy emerged. Any worker returning at dusk without a full pail would sacrifice a finger to compensate. The first evening it happened, a teenager stood empty-handed under the stockade gate, exhausted from spending half the day nursing his malaria-fevered sister. The machete sang downward. He jerked back just in time. The blade found only air and astonished shouts. Chaos erupted. Knives meant for bark slashed rope restraints, boiling latex spilled onto boots, and rifle butts cracked like green coconuts. By moonrise, dozens had vanished into the understory, carrying their injured, navigating by star patterns their grandparents once burned into pottery glaze. Safety, however, was a relative notion. Families that slipped away built new malokas deeper upriver, trading distance for isolation. Plots of cassava were cleared where parrots screamed at chainsaw ghosts that would never arrive. Shamans convened entire villages for communal ceremonies, everyone drinking, everyone singing, shared nausea that purged more than venom. Fear, guilt, rage, grief, all mixed with bile beneath the stars. In visions, they saw Ronin the anaconda coiling protectively around their houses, geometry stitched in luminous threads. When darkness quieted, they felt, if not safe, then at least accompanied. Word reached the plantation owners that whole communities had melted into the forest, expeditions set off, rifles polished, Bibles packed next to gun oil. They returned weeks later minus men and patients, claiming the jungle itself turned labyrinth. Trails doubled back, river branches rearranged, fog so dense, bullets flew in slow loops. One corporal insisted he saw a naked woman singing in moonlight, her voice weaving white vines that tangled his legs. The officers who filed reports chalked it up to malaria hallucinations. The Shipibo noted that Maestra Shani had completed a potent dieta just before those patrols went awry. The friars fared no better. Father Inocencio preached that Kene designs were Satan's wallpaper and confiscated anything bearing them, rattles, gourds, even infants' slings. One evening, he built a towering pyre to burn pagan relics. As flames licked skyward, a hush fell. Wind died, leaves stilled, and even mosquitoes quit their whining. The fire dimmed, then guttered as if choked by unseen hands, before surging sideways to consume the wooden crucifix leaning nearby. The next morning, the bell that called villagers to mass was found split. Father Inocencio developed a fever doctors called jungle madness and was shipped downriver, murmuring in Spanish about snakes that sang psalms backward. Hidden learning centers blossomed along tributaries, places where apprentices studied in secrecy. Each refuger specialized, one in the songs that unspool fevers like yarn from a spindle, another in carving rattles whose rhythms mimic stone-throwing river spirits, a third in Kene, designs that confuse rifle sights. Students memorized not just plant lore, but survival tactics, reading wind for scent of gunpowder, detecting engine cough miles away, erasing footprints with palm fronds. Paradoxically, teachers also preached an ethic of mercy. If a wounded foreman stumbled onto a camp, heal him. Poison left in a foreign body, they argued, can find its way back through waterways and trade goods to harm everyone. A handful of overseers, saved from snakebite or malaria, later testified in distant offices that Shipibo curanderos had virtues the rubber lords lacked. Paperwork shifted ever so slightly. Budgets for punitive patrols shrank, not out of compassion, but out of bureaucratic hesitation. Rubber prices collapsed in 1915, punctured by plantations in Southeast Asia. Suddenly steamers sat moored and useless, chains rusting, decks sprouting ferns. Overseers abandoned posts, missionaries chased new crises, the forest inhaled, families returned to ancestral beaches, planting gardens where stockades had stood. Children born after the collapse grew up hearing rumors of a time when the river roared with iron dragons, but it felt as distant as a bad dream left in another hammock. A fragile reprieve fluttered into place, only to be shredded when influenza hit. The sickness rolled up the tributaries like invisible fog. Fever burned through villages with the cruelty of an oil fire on water, leaving blackened grief in its wake. Shamans sang themselves hoarse, boiled every antipyretic bark they knew, called upon Bobinzana, Chuchuasha, Odje. But the virus moved faster than visions. Some maestros died, chanting mid-breath. Apprentices closed aged eyes and buried them facing east, so dawn would have the first opportunity to wake their spirits. One grieving widow broke her clay tobacco pipe and etched on its shards the words, "When songs cannot stop death, they must remember life." After she was gone, the shards were sewn into a ceremonial skirt worn by dancers at the next solstice, so her message would circle the community whenever hips swayed. In the lull that followed, Pucallpa sprouted on a patch of riverbank chosen for its flatness by airstrip surveyors. Planes buzzed overhead like beetles of shining aluminum. A dirt road carved toward the Andes, promising new markets and new trespassers. Mission schools reopened, this time offering arithmetic and Spanish literacy. Some parents allowed teenage sons to attend. Those boys came home reciting multiplication tables beneath the same roofs where grandmothers still told the story of Ronin. Household walls now heard both languages, the measured cadence of psalms at dusk and ancestral myths whispered after lamps were blown out. Women adapted quickest, applying Kené to tin cups and kerosene lantern shades. Tourists would pay, so why not paint luminosity onto anything that held light? Ceremonies evolved with equal ingenuity. Outboard motors ferried families to gatherings miles apart. Battery radios were switched off before drinking, so static would not compete with Icaros. Some shamans began adding violet orchid tubers to the vine leaf brew, chasing subtler hues in the vision field. Others experimented with chacruna, sourced from Andean slopes, comparing the flavor of cloud forests versus lowlands like vintners sampling terroir. Anthropologists arrived with wax cylinder recorders, asking permission to capture songs that vibrated the air, older than their microphones. The maestros obliged, but often snuck coded verses into the recordings, blessings that any Shipibo listener would recognize as warnings to handle this knowledge carefully. The wax hissed, the cylinders spun, the songs slipped slyly into global archives carrying encrypted seeds of caution. Word of the vine reached farther shores. In 1953, an American botanist named Madison Clark stumbled into Pucallpa, equal parts earnest and sunburned, lugging a tape recorder as large as a coffin and a guitar perpetually out of tune. He humbly approached Maestro Ari, explaining he wished to study hallucinogenic flora. Ari listened, then asked a single question. Was the stranger prepared to meet a plant that could rearrange his understanding of death as easily as a child rearranges river stones? Clark said yes, though his hands trembled. That night, the Maloka filled with villagers and the thick, sentient silence that precedes the first sip. Clark gagged on the brew's bitterness. When the visions came, he felt his lungs transform into hummingbirds beating against bone bars, panicked. Ari steadied him with a palm to the chest and a song so delicate it seemed woven from moonlight threads. In the vision, the hummingbirds calmed, their wings traced Kené patterns across infinite space, stitching galaxies to rivers, ancestors to unborn children. By dawn, Clark wept with gratitude, insisting Shipibo cosmology was proof of an indigenous science more advanced than any lab. He published papers that few academics read, but which electrified the burgeoning counterculture. Seekers began drifting toward the Amazon not for rubber or souls, but for revelation. The influx felt different from previous invasions, yet carried its own risks. Cash flowed, allowing zinc roofs, school supplies and occasional outboard upgrades, but also lured opportunists who had memorized only enough Icaro melodies to fool paying guests. Fake maestros appeared, ceremonies expanded beyond intimate settings, and power imbalances resurfaced in subtler guises. The elders gathered beneath a star-pocked roof and debated late into night. Some argued for closing ceremonies to outsiders, others insisted the vine itself chose whom to teach, and that rejecting sincere pilgrims would insult the plant spirit. They settled on a cautious middle path: share, but demand respect, reciprocity, and obedience to Shipibo protocol. Knowledge, after all, grows brittle if hoarded and shatters if scattered. It must be passed along like a living ember, protected yet freely breathing. The river kept flowing, brown, wide, unstoppable. The iron steamboats had come and gone, replaced by fiberglass ferries blasting cumbia. Mission schools taught decimals next to myths. Kené patterns now adorned surfboards bought by foreigners chasing remote breaks. Amid the churn stood the Maloka, an island of darkness where electric bulbs were banished, and every ceremony began with the same ancient whistle. Within that sacred hush, a maestro could still feel Ronin coil around the pillars, scales shimmering with the memory of a world ordered by song rather than greed. And in that moment, the past and the present braided together, ready or not, to carry the Shipibo toward whatever dawn the river dreamed next. Morning haze lifted off the river in thin silver sheets as Pucallpa's first diesel trucks rattled down the new all-weather road, scattering stray dogs and sending teenage boys scrambling to sell plantains through open windows. The trucks hauled sacks of cement, crates of bottled soda, and portable generators that promised light at the flick of a switch. For many Shipibo, illumination had always meant kerosene's flutter or moonlight on water. Now electricity arrived smelling of hot copper and spilled gasoline. The town's single transformer buzzed like an angry cicada, and cables slithered outward toward villages the way vines once crept inward. Some elders muttered that wires looked suspiciously like Ronin's scales laid straight and dead, a serpent forced into unnatural service. But younger families eyed the glow of bulb-lit storefronts and wondered how long candlelight alone could hold back the modern night. Change came fastest through children. Mission teachers, wearing crisp cotton uniforms and wielding chalk like wands, invited Shipibo parents to enroll their sons and daughters in day classes that promised literacy, arithmetic, and civilized habits. Many agreed, remembering how debts under the rubber regime had grown from the simple inability to read a ledger. Just after dawn, canoes ferried small armies of schoolchildren across rain-dimpled water, each child balancing a slate board and a packet of yucca bread wrapped in palm leaf. By afternoon, they returned reciting Spanish vowels so sharp their grandparents joked the syllables could gut a fish. Yet lessons proved double-edged. The alphabet was taught alongside a catalogue of forbidden practices. No more painting Kené designs on faces, no more rattles in church, no more stories of talking trees. One teacher confiscated a pottery shard covered in geometric swirls, calling it demonic scribble, and smashed it against the steps. The girl who had carried the shard, her grandmother's last memory of a flood season 3 decades past, stared at the clay dust and felt something irreplaceable drift into the river breeze. That night, her grandmother sat by the cooking fire and told the story again, line by line, until every cousin repeated it from heart. If clay could be broken, memory would have to harden in flesh. Electric light threaded deeper each season. A missionary group installed a generator in Nueva Palestina and strung bulbs along the Maloka ridgepole. On its inaugural night, the village gathered for a hymn service. The pastor flicked a switch, and white light flooded the hall so suddenly that a dozen elders gasped and shielded their eyes as if struck. The pastor spoke of divine radiance, but the effect on ceremony was immediate and chilling. 1 month later, when the maestro prepared an ayahuasca session, he insisted every bulb be unscrewed, every socket stuffed with leaves. Darkness returned, thick and consoling, broken only by the ember of a mapacho and the river's distant hush. The maestro began to sing, voice trembling like wind through bamboo, reminding everyone that light has many colors, and not all are generous. Around the same time, the Summer Institute of Linguistics dispatched young linguists fluent in phonetic notation and evangelical zeal. They arrived with portable reel-to-reel recorders, eager to reduce the Shipibo tongue to discrete symbols. The team spent humid afternoons coaxing elders to pronounce elusive consonants, while waxy tape captured the breath of a language older than nation-states. In exchange, the linguists offered Bible verses translated into Shipibo, a novelty that felt both flattering and unsettling. Some elders praised hearing sacred stories in their own cadence, others sensed a Trojan horse. Quiet debates flared into late-night discussions in doorways where smoke from cooking fires mingled with river mist, questions hanging like bats. If foreign gods now speak Shipibo, do they also eat Shipibo food? Do they chase away the river spirits or sit beside them? By the mid-1960s, Pucallpa's muddy streets hosted thrill-seeking travelers, mostly young Americans and Europeans with backpacks stitched in psychedelic colors. They carried paperback copies of Madison Clark's field notes and looked for curanderos willing to guide vision quests. Some shamans welcomed the novelty and the cash. They reasoned that plants decide whom to teach, and if the vine invited pale-faced dreamers, who were they to refuse? Others scoffed at tourists who treated ayahuasca like a carnival ride, vomiting once and boasting of enlightenment. Even so, coins clinked into village economies, funding tin roofs and outboard motors that cut travel time to markets from days to hours. Trade flourished, but so did envy. Neighbors argued over who had the right to host ceremonies. Rumors of diluted brew or stolen icaros spread like burrs, sticking to every conversation. Logging crews soon followed the road's dusty ribbon, eyeing hardwood giants that towered above the canopy in columns of cathedral grace. Chainsaws whined like furious hornets, and logs the width of canoes crashed into understory, sending clouds of parrots wheeling skyward in panicked spirals. Company men offered cash for cutting rights, sometimes a fair wage, often a pittance, always tempting in a world where school fees and kerosene carried price tags. A few chiefs signed contracts with ink they could now read, others refused, believing pen strokes could cut deeper than axes. Those refusals occasionally turned dangerous. One morning, villagers of Patria Nueva woke to find boundary posts uprooted and replanted miles inward, a bureaucratic magic trick that rendered ancestral gardens suddenly vacant. When elders protested at the regional office, the paperwork was missing, replaced by a new map, drawn without Kene, but heavy with legal authority. The elders returned home defeated yet determined. They convened an all-night ceremony, sang the river's original name into their children's ears, and dug trenches around their gardens. That season, chainsaws stopped at the trench line, at least for a while. Television antennas sprouted on zinc roofs in the 1970s, capturing fuzz-ridden signals from Lima. Soap operas, soccer broadcasts, news of guerrilla uprisings in the Andes. Young Shipibo men huddled around flickering screens, transfixed by images of cities where concrete rose higher than saber trees. Some felt shame for bare feet and hammocks, others felt only curiosity. Soon, radio announcers slipped Shipibo words into broadcasts, selling cooking oil and insecticide. Language proved more supple than expected. It bent, absorbed, and reflected, embedding new rhythms into old proverbs. A grandmother might scold a lazy grandson by comparing him to a broken antenna rather than a sluggish caiman, the humor soothing the sting. External storms brewed darker. The Shining Path insurgency ignited in the highlands, and rumors drifted downriver like smoke. Government soldiers patrolled roads, searching buses, suspecting any indigenous group of harboring rebels. Patrol boats cruised the Ucayali, mounted guns glinting in sunsets that once signaled fishing hour. Meanwhile, coca cultivation spread through valleys where soil and desperation ran equally deep. Some Shipibo youth, lured by quick money, joined harvesting crews across territorial lines. They returned with pockets of bills and stories of helicopters spraying poison. Shamans observed an uptick in patients whose nightmares smelled of jet fuel and gunpowder. Poisonous spirits unknown to Kene but no less real. Amid unrest, an unexpected ally emerged in the form of international environmentalists who arrived with GPS units and legal jargon. They proposed mapping Shipibo territory to claim communal land titles under new Peruvian law. Elders, wary after the logging betrayal, approached negotiations with caution, asking whether coordinates could ever truly capture a river's heart. Nevertheless, the mapping proceeded. Young villagers followed technicians through forest, holding mirrored prisms aloft, while satellites blinked overhead. Lines were drawn, not in the silt, but in digital space, hoping bureaucracy would respect them. Title certificates arrived thick with official stamps, a strangely heavy paper shield against bulldozers. During these years, Maestro Serpent, a healer already grey-haired when the road first opened, decided the time had come to pass his lineage. He selected 2 apprentices, Lyria, 17, whose Kene tapestries sometimes predicted weather better than elders could, and Wayo, 15, whose singing voice could tether children's attention like a hook on a fish jaw. Their dieta took place on a ridge where the forest trembled with wind from passing cargo planes, yet remained untouched by their shadows. For 3 moons they ate unsalted fish and green plantains, drank bark infusions that left the tongue numb, and listened for plants to speak. Lyria dreamed cedar roots turning to radio wires. Wayo saw rows of tourists lining up like ducks at feeding time. On the final night, Maestro Serpent administered a small cup of murky brew, then sat cross-legged, whistling a tune that rose like smoke into a sky torn by clouds. At dawn, he told them his vision, a river branching into 2 currents. One flowed fast and glittered with coins but ended in a sinkhole. The other meandered, feeding gardens, carrying songs on its surface. Choose every day which branch to follow, he said, for they braid and unbraid as easily as rope. By the late 1980s, the first purpose-built ayahuasca lodges appeared along feeder creeks, huts with screened windows, hemp hammocks, and laminated menus listing ceremony packages. 3 nights, 5 nights, dieta add-on, priced separately. Trip report chatter filtered back to Europe and North America through photocopied zines where adjectives piled one upon another, transformative, cosmic, terrifying, illuminating. Some travelers carried home genuine humility, others arrived only to harvest mystique and market it under exotic brand names. Ripple effects reached deep. One unscrupulous foreign apprentice wooed a maestro's daughter, memorized several icaros, then vanished upriver to host copycat ceremonies that charged triple and offered watered-down brew seasoned with boastful lies. When news reached the maestro, he sighed and carved a new rattle, its handle shaped like a coiled serpent biting its tail, an emblem reminding him that songs misused eventually circle back to their source. The Peruvian state, eager to capitalize on ethnobotanical tourism, dispatched officials to regulate healing centers. Paperwork mushroomed, sanitation permits, tax forms, curandero identification cards. Some shamans complied, seeing in the stamps a shield similar to the land titles. Others refused, citing ancestral authority predating any ministry. Disputes occasionally erupted into raids, malokas were shuttered, medicinal plants confiscated as controlled substances, even though their vines had twisted there centuries before the concept of a drug law. The irony was not lost on villagers who once watched soldiers ship crates of rainforest timber to foreign ports. If a tree could be exported as lumber but outlawed as medicine, what exactly did the law protect? Within the community, generational friction crackled like dry leaves. Grandsons, fluent in both Spanish and Shipibo, argued with grandmothers who mistrusted soy sauce, tinned tuna, and anything that came wrapped in plastic. Some nights, the family cookfire hosted debates over kerosene's dangers versus open flame smoke. Other nights, disputes evaporated into laughter as elders challenged youth to recall Kené patterns from memory. The contest inevitably ended with both groups scratching designs in dust, discovering that memory and novelty could interlace into new motifs. Radio finally broadcast regular Shipibo language programs in 1992, hosted by a teenage DJ known for segueing traditional flute melodies into Andean pop. The show became a fixture. Listeners tuned in at dusk to hear announcements about river levels, vaccine clinics, and which maestro was hosting an open ceremony that weekend. The DJ also read poetry by young writers who blended imagery of satellites and anacondas, highways and spirit ladders, forging a literature no teacher had imagined. One afternoon he aired a taped Icaro, echo filtered, so that the radio's tinny speaker sounded cavernous. Grandmothers wept. City commuters stalled in traffic felt sudden chills. Somewhere a government official wondered if culture could be copyrighted. Toward the decade's close, a violent crescendo shook the region. Narco-traffickers, displaced by Andean counterinsurgency campaigns, began using remote Amazon airstrips for clandestine flights. Fast boats tore the Ucayali at night, their wake eroding riverbanks where manioc grew. Villages faced a new calculus: refuse traffickers and risk retaliation, assist and risk military raids. Elders counseled neutrality, a stance easier declared than lived. When 2 crates of contraband were ditched near San Salvador after a shootout with naval patrols, township leaders burned the packages rather than sell them. The smoke rose acrid and black, carrying a smell unlike any leaf or vine. Shamans reported troubled ceremonies for weeks afterward, visions clouded by static, jaguars coughing as if their lungs were full of ash. Amid turbulence, seeds of organization germinated. Community leaders formed a council called Koshikoks, the Shipibo Konibo Zetibo coalition, aimed at unifying villages scattered along hundreds of river kilometers. Representatives paddled for days to convene beneath a palm frond roof, where they shared cassava beer and drafted a charter asserting land rights, cultural sovereignty, and the freedom to practice ancestral medicine without interference. Young lawyers translated declarations into legal Spanish. Elders wove ceremonial belts to mark the moment. Each belt carried alternating bands of white and black Kené, symbolizing day and night, tradition and innovation, neither conquering the other. The council's first major challenge arrived almost immediately. A foreign oil company secured exploratory concessions overlapping Shipibo territory. Helicopters thudded overhead, seismic crews dynamited test holes, and fish floated belly-up downstream. The council filed injunctions, organized protests in Pucallpa's plaza, and sent delegations to Lima. Their case dragged through courts, but the fight galvanized a generation. Students who once daydreamed of leaving the forest now studied environmental law. Artisans painted oil-slick patterns into Kené cloths that tourists bought, unwittingly funding legal fees. Throughout these upheavals, ceremonies remained the artery pumping cultural blood. On many evenings, the Maloka filled with a half-circle of plastic chairs, donations from a church, beside woven mats that smelled of smoked cane. Tourists, soldiers, loggers, and activists sometimes sat side by side, united for a few hours in darkness. The maestro's Icaros navigated each participant's jagged interior, stitching quiet where turmoil once raged. One could argue that these nightly gatherings, improvised yet ancient, did more to preserve community than any treaty. For within the pitch-black chamber, distinctions blurred. Spanish and Shipibo words dissolved into melody. Diesel fumes surrendered to the earthy perfume of mapacho. The river outside slowed its breathing to match the rhythm of rattles. When dawn birds finally pierced the silence, people emerged dazed but wired with a strange optimism, as though the jungle itself whispered, "Still here, still singing." Breakfast bowls of fish broth steamed in yellow light filtered through palm walls. Children chased each other between stilts, giggling in two languages. A grandmother traced Kené in a puddle with her toe and looked up at the sky streaked pink. The river carried yesterday's soot and tomorrow's rain, indifferent yet attentive. Somewhere beyond the nearest bend, a diesel engine coughed to life, but for the moment its growl sounded less like intrusion and more like a distant drum waiting to be woven into the next verse of the same unending song. Morning shimmered off the Ucayali in broken mirrors, each ripple flaring with sunlight like a signal lamp. A flotilla of fiberglass skiffs nosed upriver, their outboard motors whining through humid air that smelled of diesel, molasses, and distant fires. In the lead boat sat a French documentary crew, cameras wrapped in plastic, gawking at the canopy as though the jungle might suddenly part to reveal paradise or perdition on cue. Behind them rode 4 backpackers, Australian, Canadian, 2 Germans, clutching water filters and paperback guides titled Journey to the Vine. Bringing up the rear, almost invisible, was a canoe carved from a single cedar, its paddle lifted by a 70-year-old woman named Lyria. She wore a faded t-shirt that read Mother Earth in cracked English letters, and her eyes tracked the tourists the way owls track mice, curious, unblinking, ready to strike if need be. 3 decades had passed since Lyria's dieta on the ridge, and Maestro Tserkin's prophecy still echoed, 2 currents forever braiding and unbraiding. She had watched Pucallpa transform from a timber town into a neon-strip tourist hub, watched Moluccas morph into eco-lodges with fiber-optic Wi-Fi and hot showers, watched Ayahuasca migrate from whispered ceremony to hashtag. Sometimes she felt proud that the world finally recognized the power of Shipibo medicine. Other times she felt like a guardian watching strangers handle a jaguar cub, unaware the creature might grow teeth overnight. The flotilla tied up at Santa Clara, a village newly outfitted with solar panels, and a thatched conference hall trimmed in colorful plastic bunting. The French crew had come to film a Healing Summit, an event masterminded by a Lima-based NGO touting cross-cultural wellness and rainforest conservation. The program promised panel discussions, trauma recovery through plant teachers, indigenous rights in the Anthropocene, followed by nightly ceremonies led by certified Shipibo healers. Lyria and several other maestros had agreed to host, but their acceptance came with conditions. Ceremonies would follow traditional protocol, no filming inside the Molucca, and each visitor would participate in a reciprocity workshop, planting seedlings, cleaning riverbanks, or teaching English to village kids. The organizers nodded enthusiastically, but Lyria suspected the cameras would seek spectacle rather than subtlety once darkness fell. The first evening's ceremony played out like a divided dream. Tourists perched on ergonomic meditation cushions, sipping electrolytes between anxious glances at plastic bath buckets stamped with a corporate logo. Lyria's apprentice, Yari, extinguished LED lanterns the volunteers tried to hang for safety. In the ensuing darkness, the Molucca sighed its relief, as though wood and palm could breathe again without fluorescent glare. Lyria portioned the brew, noticing foreign hands tremble as they accepted the cup. She sang the opening Icaro in a tremolo that fluttered up to the rafters, and rippled along ribs and spines. Halfway through the third verse, she sensed the tourist's visions ignite, electric storms of color, childhood memories unspooling, ancient vines that spoke in arithmetic fragrance. But she also sensed digital static, phone vibrations left on in backpacks, a camera powered up despite the ban, the buzz of attention angled like a lens rather than offered like prayer. At dawn, the white faces emerged, wan, wide-eyed, calling the night unbelievable. Some hugged Lyria awkwardly, others thrust microphones at her like hungry beaks. She gave soft answers in Shipibo, letting Yari translate. The medicine is teacher, ceremony is school, everyone must complete homework by living differently. She pointed toward the seedlings that waited for planting. Most nodded, one objected, and the camera caught it all. Before lunch, a YouTube clip appeared online titled "Shaman Scolds Influencer Mid-Trip." It garnered 30,000 views in 6 hours. By midweek, Lyria had developed a new algorithm, less digital, more intuitive, for discerning sincere seekers from trophy hunters. Those who truly listened spoke less and worked more, their hands blackening with soil beside village teenagers who teased them gently but shared machetes anyway. Those who sought bragging rights read sacred plant books aloud at full volume, asking which crystal aligned best with ayahuasca's frequency. Lyria dispensed equal measures of patience and admonition. One evening, she halted the brew midway to chastise a man live-streaming from his phone. Her Shipibo words were spare, but Yari's translation, polite yet firm, settled like feathers over stone. A spirit does not reveal herself to a mirror that shows her image to strangers. Not all conflicts were so manageable. Toward festival's end, a self-proclaimed Brazilian maestro arrived uninvited, wearing a feather headdress bought in Iquitos and a grin wet with ambition. He pitched a rival ceremony in a clearing downriver, promising advanced kundalini activation mixed with ayahuasca, huachuma, kambo, and ice baths, 4 medicines in one night for twice the price. A handful of tourists defected, citing curiosity. Lyria and the elders convened by torchlight, weighing response. They chose silence. The forest would teach its own lessons. At dawn, a canoe glided back, bearing 3 shaken foreigners who'd fled the rival camp after the maestro groped a participant mid-vision. Lyria's anger flared hot, then cooled into sorrow older than any law. She prepared tobacco smoke, sang a lullaby Icaro, and reminded the tourists that plants revealed truth, not only through bliss, but through hard edges. The festival concluded with a tree planting ritual, cameras clicking as seedlings slid into damp earth. Lyria's fingers pressed soil over roots, while the documentary crew zoomed in, desperate for the perfect shot of cultural redemption. She wondered if their lens could see the real seedlings, possibility and paradox growing unseen in the hearts of every participant. The crew departed, solar panels dimmed under gathering storm clouds, and Santa Clara exhaled, grateful for ordinary sounds, machetes ringing on wood, children laughing, the gossip of macaws. The next years unfolded like a taut rope. Progress tugged forward, resistance pulled back, and frayed fibers threatened to snap. Smartphones became ubiquitous, even among elders who once considered them soul-catching boxes. Grandmothers found delight in video calls with migrant grandchildren. Maestros used messaging apps to schedule ceremonies. But phones also carried rumors faster than paddles, tales of healers charging exorbitant fees, of foreigners dying in poorly supervised sessions, of Shipibo designs copied onto yoga mats sold in Los Angeles boutiques. Lyria watched Kené swirl through global markets like dye in a river, beautiful, unstoppable, staining everything. One scandal hit closest to home. A European fashion house released a runway collection featuring patterns clearly lifted from Shipibo tapestries. The garments sold for thousands of euros apiece. The press release cited ancestral inspiration, but offered no credit or compensation. Outrage surged through Koshikoks. Liria traveled to Pucallpa to speak at an emergency assembly, her voice steady. If they wear our stories, they must carry our memories and our grief. Young lawyers drafted cease and desist letters, activists launched online campaigns, hashtags bloomed with digital Kené banners. Under mounting pressure, the fashion house offered a token donation to a rainforest charity. The council rejected it, demanding a licensing agreement that ceded ongoing royalties to Shipibo artisans. Negotiations dragged until a journalist leaked internal memos revealing executives' fears of cultural theft backlash. Within months, the company surrendered, signing a contract that funneled a percentage of sales to a community craft fund. It was a small victory, but as Liria left the lawyer's office, she felt Maestro Serkin's prophecies stir. Every time the fast current gouged, the slow current planted. Around that time, tragedy struck with brutal clarity. In 2018, a revered Shipibo elder and healer, Maestra Olivia, was shot outside her home by a Canadian tourist claiming she had hexed him. The news slammed into villages like a fist. Candlelight vigils ignited along the river, songs rose in grief and fury, and elders convened another assembly under tarpaulin roofs. Liria, voice raw, insisted they respond, not with curses but with organization. They drafted the Yarina Kocha Declaration, naming abuses plainly, sexual assault, appropriation, fake shamans, and outlining community-led standards, visitor orientation, background checks, consent protocols, fair pay, and the right to bar or expel offenders. The declaration also called for an indigenous-run healing school, Escuela Meraya, to certify Shipibo practitioners and educate outsiders. Gathering signatures, Liria felt the rope tighten again, tragedy jerking the community forward into action. Funding the school proved labyrinthine. Grants required proposals in Spanish bureaucratic prose. Donors loved glossy brochures. Construction crews quoted prices in soaring dollars. Still, progress crawled. By 2020, foundations were dug, bamboo walls rose, and children gathered to paint Kené murals in lime and indigo. Then a silent threat arrived from beyond the forest. The coronavirus slipped down highways onto plains, into riverboats. Lockdowns shuttered retreat centers overnight. Tourists vanished, leaving huts empty, economies gasping. Some villages sealed off with leaf barricades and armed watchmen. Others suffered outbreaks traced to supply runs. Liria fell ill in the first wave. Fever racked her body like a shamanic purge, but left her unable to sing. Yari brewed antiviral infusions, whispered Icaros into her ear, and prayed to Bobinzana. She survived, lungs forever tender, voice lower but intact. Many did not. The river carried funerary songs under skies unnaturally clear of airplane contrails. Quarantine brought paradoxical gifts. With tourists gone, forests quieted, wildlife ventured closer, and villages rediscovered rhythms unbroken by retreat schedules. Youngsters who once guided ceremonies relearned fishing techniques. Artisans wove masks embroidered with Kené, shipping them via courier to cities where demand for protective art skyrocketed. Digital classrooms sprouted. Liria recorded video lessons on plant identification, her rough voice underscored by birdsong. Elders who had distrusted smartphones now beamed stories into grandchildren's bedrooms 2 continents away. Even Escuela Meraya adapted. Yari led remote seminars in ritual safety, instructing foreign therapists over live streams how to recognize spiritual emergencies, no diagnostic manual listed. When borders reopened, visitors returned with 2 years' worth of pent-up yearning. Some arrived humbler, having tasted mortality. Others sought quick fixes for pandemic blues. Meanwhile, climate tremors intensified. Unseasonal floods swept away cassava fields. Drought shrank fish stocks. Smoke from distant fires turned sunsets to bruised orange. It became impossible to ignore how fragile the river's breath had grown. At a village council, a teenage girl, granddaughter of Wayo, stood to speak. She described a dream where the river rose into the sky, turning into a snake of steam that circled the planet, searching for rain that never came. Her voice quavered, but Lyria nodded gravely. Visions are not just personal, but ecological. Climate scientists soon corroborated what dreams foretold. Rainfall patterns shifted. Mercury spilled from illegal gold mines upstream. Waterborne mercury infiltrated bloodstreams. The council teamed with environmental NGOs to install water filters, yet filters couldn't extract despair. Shamans reported ceremonies clouded by metallic hues, Kené spirals tinted toxic grey. They convened a multinational forum via satellite link, Shipibo curanderos, Maori healers, Sami joik singers, Amazonian botanists, climate activists. They shared techniques, songs, strategies, and realized their work was converging. Heal land, heal people, or watch both vanish. In this crucible, Escuela Meraya finally opened its doors in person. The inaugural cohort blended Shipibo youth, 2 Ashaninka apprentices, a Quechua midwife, and 4 carefully vetted foreigners, a psychotherapist, a neuroscientist, a Maori Rongoa practitioner, and an Afro-Brazilian Terreiro priestess. Curriculum spanned botany, ethics, trauma care, legal rights, and climate science. Morning lectures echoed with macaws, afternoons filled with soil samples, nights returned to the Maloka, where the vine taught what books could not. Lyria taught the history module, her chalk scribbles looping in Kené motifs across a plywood board. Serpents, saws, data clouds, arteries, satellites. Each line testified to the same truth. Patterns survive by adapting without forgetting their source. Graduation coincided with a global conference on psychedelic therapy in Barcelona. Escuela Meraya sent a delegation led by Yari and the young neuroscientist. On stage, they unveiled a Shipibo-designed ethical framework, reciprocity percentages, dual license credentials requiring cultural and clinical fluency, mandatory reinvestment in the forest. The crowd erupted in applause. Pharmaceutical executives jotted notes, venture capitalists sniffed opportunity. Activists raised banners reading, "Protect Indigenous Intellectual Sovereignty." Backstage, Yari received more invitations than she had pockets, but she weighed each, remembering Lyria's quiet counsel. Choose the meandering river when possible, and let the fast current serve only when necessary. Back home, Lyria's health faded like twilight. She still greeted dawn with tobacco smoke, but coughed more often, voice rasping where once it soared. One evening, she asked Yari to gather the apprentices. They sat around her hammock, firelight dancing on walls patterned with Kené that told stories longer than this life. She spoke softly. Ronin's song never ends, only changes pitch. When you hear new instruments join, airplanes, engines, microchips, don't panic. Listen, find harmony, and when noise distorts the melody, sing stronger, not louder. She placed her rattle in Yari's hands. It was the serpent tail one Maestro Tserkin had carved after betrayal. Its seeds rattled like distant rain, warning and promise entwined. Lyria died before sunrise, breath easing out as the river's tide turned. Word traveled through static-scarred radios across fiber cables into social feeds where condolences interlaced in many languages. The funeral spanned 2 nights. First, private vigil, pure Shipibo. Second, communal stream where voices from 5 continents joined in prayer, song, silence. Someone projected Kené designs onto a screen suspended between palm trunks, the patterns pulsed with heartbeat animations coded by a Maori tech artist. Across the world, watchers witnessed Ronin's scales shimmer digital yet ancient, proving again that time bends like river loops. The day after, Yari stood on the beach, sunlight scalding fresh grief. She watched motorboats ferry a new group of travelers upriver. Climate researchers, burned-out executives, a Syrian refugee couple, two Peruvian university students eager to rediscover ancestral roots. She inhaled diesel, forest, grief, resilience, and felt currents braid beneath her sternum. The future approached, fast, loud, unpredictable. Yet the river still spoke in its muddy baritone. Yari picked up her paddle, tapped it twice on the gunwale the way Lyria used to, and guided her canoe into the midstream where fast and slow water met. Overhead, vultures circled under a sky streaked by vapor trails. Somewhere deep, beneath silt and centuries, Ronin stirred, singing a pattern into being that no camera could truly capture but every heart could feel if it stayed quiet long enough. And so the journey continued, one current glittering with coins and algorithms, the other winding through leaf roofs and lullabies, forever unbraiding, forever reweaving, each side incomplete without the other. Each day another chance to listen for the serpent's song beneath the roar of the modern world. A month after Lyria's funeral, the river shifted from its coffee-brown monotone to a curious emerald tint, as if someone upstream had stirred crushed jade into the current. Yari took it as a sign that nothing stays unchanged for long, least of all, grief. She paddled to Nueva Esperanza to check on Escuela Meraya's roof beams and found the courtyard crowded with hopeful apprentices and a dozen foreigners seeking cures for despair that psychologists back home had labeled treatment-resistant. Among them was a lean, sharp-eyed man who introduced himself as Mateo, smiling wide enough to show a gold molar engraved with a crucifix. He claimed Shipibo lineage through a grandmother no one could verify and announced he, too, was a maestro, one who could heal in half the time for half the price. The visiting seekers lit up at his confidence. Several peeled off to follow him before Yari could greet them. She watched his entourage disappear into the tree line and felt the river in her veins coil with unease. Mateo was not the first to appear uninvited. In the 5 years since Lyria's prophecy-laden passing, a loose underground of self-anointed shamans, some indigenous, many not, had sprouted along the tributaries. They built flashy websites boasting of 10-day journeys to source and peppered their bios with borrowed Shipibo phrases. Some had trained a season or two under legitimate maestros and left before completing the dieta. Others had learned nothing more than how to chant 2 borrowed Icaros off-key and how to mark up the price of a cup of brew tenfold. The locals called them raptadores de canciones, song thieves, though Yari felt the term was too soft for people who would pocket culture one night and pocket cash the next. The boom fed on 2 appetites: tourists, hungry for mystical fast food, and local men, hungry for quick souls. Escuela Meraya hammered at the first hunger with orientation classes and ethics briefings. It handled the second by offering apprentices stipends, reminding them that patience brought deeper rewards. Yet hunger is stubborn. Mateo returned after a week, alone this time, clothes spattered with vomit, eyes rimmed red. He claimed a foreign guest had fled with all the cash, leaving unpaid bills in Pucallpa. He begged to join Escuela Meraya as faculty, complaining the jungle was overrun with amateurs. Yari declined, politely but firmly. After he left, she asked 2 nephews to paddle discreetly downriver and verify his tale. They reported back with an uglier story. 2 tourists still lay feverish in Mateo's camp, one trailed by rumors of assault, another near renal failure from a brew laced with brugmansia. Both were airlifted out at dawn, no charges pressed. Shame and dehydration kept them silent. Bad news spread by fiber cable and river gossip alike. Within months, national newspapers screamed psychedelic Wild West. Politicians proposed licensing exams, lobbyists sniffed profit. Meanwhile, the worst incidents went unreported. A German backpacker who wandered into the forest mid-ceremony and returned days later covered in leishmaniasis sores. A young Shipibo woman lured by promises of apprenticeship, then trafficked across the Brazilian border to serve ayahuasca at VIP parties she could not afford to decline. Yari, reading transcripts of police statements, recognized the same pattern Mateo carried in his molar. Exploitation, polished until it shone like spiritual gold. Escuela Meraya pivoted from teaching solely plant science to teaching protective strategy. Lawyers were invited to lecture on intellectual property. Digital savvy apprentices mapped shamans' Instagram trails, screenshotting deceptive marketing, cataloging incidents. They compiled a blacklist that circulated discreetly among retreat centers committed to reciprocity. Yet every name struck off seemed to birth 2 more like Hydra heads. Some charlatans, keen to stay ahead, rebranded. They offered neo-shamanic fusion or quantum ayahuasca, dodging cultural theft charges by claiming innovation. The turning point came with the death of a Brazilian influencer named Lara da Luz. She possessed 2 million followers, a neon smile, and a plan to live stream her awakening from a riverside camp run by a man marketing himself as Maestro Jaguar. Within hours of drinking a brew, rumored to contain datura, she seized and asphyxiated. Her phone, still recording, captured the frantic scramble of staff who knew no emergency protocol. The video leaked, went viral, and triggered an international storm. Peru's Ministry of Health froze permits for all but a handful of registered centers. Suddenly, officials who had shrugged at years of indigenous complaints arrived with clipboards and soldiers. The crackdown cut 2 ways. Legitimate healers, now buried in paperwork, feared that ceremonies between family members might soon require licenses. The song thieves vanished deeper into unmarked creeks, taking tourists willing to break laws for revelation. Fatalities dropped, but accusations of police extortion rose. A lodge that refused bribes found its generator accidentally pushed into the river. Yari realized policy alone could not tame the shadow market. The medicine itself needed allies strong enough to outshine counterfeiters. She traveled to Lima to meet with neurologists running clinical trials on psilocybin for depression. The scientists, armed with grant money and lab coats, seemed eager yet wary of the vine's legal fog. Yari spoke of ceremony structure and integration circles. They countered with double-blind placebo designs. Common language emerged around safety, screening for psychosis, monitoring vitals, informed consent. Out of that dialogue grew a pilot program. Shipibo-led retreats for war veterans, run under a non-profit shield, blending EEG headbands with Icaros. Data collection was meticulous, so was ritual purity. Veterans, accustomed to stiff hospital beds, wept when they first lay in hammocks. Preliminary results stunned skeptical funders. Trauma scores plummeted, but only in those groups where a fluent Shipibo maestro sang throughout. The study suggested what Yari's ancestors had long known: the song was half the medicine. Meanwhile, inside the community, reckoning arrived. A respected Onaya named Rolando, mentor to several promising youths, was accused of groping foreign women mid-vision. Complaints came silently at first, whispers carried on paddle wakes, then surfaced in a joint statement by 3 paying guests. Rolando dismissed them as cultural misunderstanding. Escuela Meraya's ethics panel summoned him. Yari watched the hearing beneath a tin roof as rain hammered punctuation into silence. Rolando argued that Shipibo's ceremony dissolved bodily boundaries. The panel retorted that consent was universal. In the end, he was suspended, no ceremonies for a year, mandatory retraining with female maestras. Some elders called the sentence harsh, others too soft. The decision stood, sending a wider signal: misusing power would no longer hide behind incense smoke. Change also brewed in quieter channels. Young Shipibo web developers launched KenéGuard, an online registry where travelers could verify a healer's credentials, read community reviews, and see transparency reports on how retreat profits circulated locally. Centers that withheld their financial breakdown showed up with a red caution icon. Song thieves attempted to spam the site with fake reviews, but found that algorithms like spirits could be fierce guardians when coded by people who understood reciprocity. Funding came from micro-royalties won in the fashion house settlement. Every garment sold abroad now funneled cents into tech infrastructure protecting the tradition it imitated. Still, the dark side adapted. One morning, Yari discovered a slick advertisement for Kene NFTs, digital tokens minted from scanned Shipibo textile designs, sold without permission on blockchain marketplaces. Buyers believed they'd secured exclusive spiritual art. Artisans received nothing. The council filed takedown notices, but enforcement in crypto space resembled battling mist with machetes. So Yari gathered weavers, coders, and adolescent gamers into a roundhouse and asked, if they treat Kene as data, then let's become the server. They birthed Casa de Patrones, an online platform where genuine artists minted their own NFTs, each embedded with a smart contract directing a slice of resale value back to community eco-funds. Collectors craving digital talismans flocked to the site, pushing counterfeit tokens into obscurity. The forest, in turn, gained thousands of seedlings planted by revenue from pixels. The river marked time by floods more than calendars, and soon the high water of another rainy season arrived. Hamlets waded shin-deep through kitchens, fish glimmered in maize fields. Amid this watery upheaval, a rumor spread. Mateo had resurfaced, calling himself Sasha Jaguar, operating a floating lodge that drifted to avoid checkpoints. His latest gimmick combined Cambo frog venom with Sapo toad secretion and Ayahuasca in a single night. Stories circulated of seizures, of a tourist found drifting face down while staff debated whether to call authorities. Escuela Meraya's council debated intervention. Then a telegram arrived. A Shipibo boatman had gone missing after refusing to ferry Mateo's cargo. Word was that he'd been beaten, thrown overboard into piranha waters. Yari felt the serpent coil again, but this time with an edge colder than anger: duty. She convened elders, younger maestros, and the legal team. Travel to the floating lodge posed risks. Mateo reportedly bribed rogue police. Instead, they chose a subtler path. An undercover apprentice booked 2 nights wearing a small body cam disguised as a necklace seed. Footage captured Mateo mixing brews in rusty drums, dosing guests at random volumes, pocketing passports for safekeeping. On the second night, drunk on his own concoction, he bragged about burying evidence along the bank. The apprentice paddled away at dawn with proof. Yari forwarded the video to investigative journalists who had once filmed Liria's festival. This time, the cameras turned on a predator. Empire of the Fake Shaman aired globally. Peruvian authorities, embarrassed by previous laxity, mounted a raid. They found Mateo's lodge abandoned but seized weapons, expired medicines, and a buried trove of confiscated passports, including the boatman's ID card. An arrest warrant followed, though Mateo slipped across the border. Justice in Amazonia moves like river sludge, yet rumor placed Mateo in Manaus, penniless, after dengue laid him low. Some said a rival sorcerer cursed him, others said consequences simply took the shortest current home. The victory felt hollow until the boatman resurfaced alive, half-starved, rescued by fishermen miles downstream. At a celebratory feast he hugged Yari, weeping salt into broth. She tasted relief as bitter as ayahuasca, triumph, flavored with the knowledge that another predator would rise. But she also tasted resolve, the kind that had carried the Shipibo through rubber barons, missionaries, viruses, and rising seas. That resolve crystallized at the next Yarinacocha assembly, where healers ratified a new oath. They vowed to uphold consent, transparency, ecological reciprocity, and cross-cultural humility. The oath ended with a line borrowed from Ronin's creation song, "Let patterns emerge only from true harmony." Each maestro pricked a finger, dotting red onto white cloth, stitched with Kene. When it was Yari's turn, she pressed her fingertip carefully, watching blood bloom into a spiral, tiny, human, unequivocal. After the assembly, night draped the riverbank, and Yari joined apprentices on the Maloka floor. Some were Shipibo, others Ashaninka, Mestizo, Quechua, Queer, Black, or Sami. All sat shoulder to shoulder, sharing mapacho smoke. No cameras rolled. The brew tasted of earth and memory. When Yari began her Icaro, her aging voice cracked on the first note, but the apprentices caught the melody, weaving harmonies that shimmered like starlight on water. For a moment she imagined Lyria smiling, imagined Maestro Tserkin nodding from some vine-draped balcony of the spirit world. The song rose, threading through rafters into the humid night, where frogs croaked bass, insects hissed cymbals, and the river kept its own drum. Steady, relentless, ancient. Visions unfolded, Mateo's floating lodge sinking under the weight of its own lies, forests regrowing over forgotten clear-cuts, satellites transmitting Kene patterns across auroras, future children laughing in classrooms where textbooks acknowledged Shipibo science alongside Newton and Einstein. She saw harm, there would always be harm, but also saw a patient antidote spiraling through centuries. The serpent scales refracted city skylines and vine thickets alike, reminding her that pattern is neutral until intention chooses direction. When the songs ended, dawn was already melting black into blue. Apprentices blinked in semi-darkness, hearts pounding with fresh resolve. Yari spoke softly. "Every time someone misuses this medicine, our work doubles. Every time we stand up to them, our medicine doubles in strength." She lifted the old serpent tail rattle, shook it once, and listened. Inside, the seeds rattled like bones, like rain, like distant traders peddling counterfeit dreams. Outside, the river answered with a hush that promised nothing and everything all at once, a promise older than charlatans, stronger than grief, and wider than the widest current. Somewhere far downstream, electric motors snarled awake, carrying another wave of seekers toward myth, prophet, or both. But in the Maloka, a new generation of guardians exhaled tobacco smoke into the rafters. They would paddle the midpoint where fast and slow water kiss, steering by songs no thief could replicate, carrying a story that refused to end where darkness began. The rainy season arrived late and furious, hammering so hard on zinc roofs that entire conversations had to be shouted or postponed. By mid-January, the Ucayali lay swollen beyond its usual greed, swallowing gardens, hen coops, and the footpaths schoolchildren had used all their lives. In years past, the high water receded after a polite visit. Now it lingered like a guest who sensed no boundary, nibbling the shoreline day after day, until elders muttered that even the river no longer remembered its own rules. Satellite images confirmed what dreams had already said. Amazon headwaters were heating, glaciers feeding them were receding, and the whole basin was tilting toward a future written in droughts and deluges more than seasons. Yari stood at the edge of her mother's stilt house, watching floodwater lick the first rung of the ladder. In her ear, a cheap radio crackled out two contradictory reports. Lima's meteorologists spoke of anomalous precipitation, while a Shipibo DJ blamed a political climate as toxic as the literal one. Neither explanation solved the immediate need for higher ground. Families lashed canoes into makeshift rafts and floated household shrines, gas stoves, and sacks of cassava above the tide. Children treated the new water roads like playground canals, paddling broken jugs as if they were pirate ships. Grown-ups worried about snakes and sewage. Escuela Meraya had planned its second international symposium for that very month, and scholars from 5 continents were already en route when nature delivered its RSVP. Flights landed to find roads impassable. Visitors took river taxis, then climbed onto truck beds, then boarded skiffs retrofitted with plastic drums for buoyancy. They arrived drenched but ecstatic, waving portable weather stations and drone kits. Yari, greeting them on the half-submerged porch, offered towels and a rueful smile. Welcome to the syllabus. The next morning, they assembled in the candle-lit hall, solar panels useless under storm clouds, and began a workshop unlike any the school had hosted. A Maori climatologist explained how rising seas had swallowed her ancestral burial grounds in Aotearoa. A Sami reindeer herder described ice that once sang under hooves, now cracking without warning. Shipibo elders spoke of flood cycles shifting out of tune with fish migrations. Maps sprawled across tables, but stories scored deeper. When talk turned to technology, an Australian coder unveiled a prototype, an AI trained on KenéGuard, capable of predicting flood paths by overlaying hydrological data onto pattern symmetries. The algorithm's output looked like ancient cloth unfurling over satellite terrain, an art of survival disguised as art for art's sake. Elders contemplated the printouts, nodded, and called it a respectful mimicry of Ronin's scales. That night ceremony commenced in a maloka crowded with voices and accents, all hushed as the hurricane lamp was doused. The brew tasted of wet bark and lightning. Yari sang first, her voice lower, since illness, yet clear as dusk birds over water. Then, in a gesture that stunned the foreigners, she handed the rattle to the Maori scientist, who offered a waiata in return. A Sami joik followed, then a Quechua earth prayer. Languages braided, none cancelling another, each phrase nudging visions into new kaleidoscopes, glaciers carving into serpents, reindeer tracks curling into Kene, coral reefs pulsing like Shipibo rattles. At dawn, the maloka smelled of damp cedar and shared purpose. The symposium rewrote its agenda before breakfast. Instead of merely cataloguing crises, it would sow tactical alliances, data exchange, joint petitions, art that doubled as warning sirens. Floodwater finally began to fall, leaving behind a film of silt that dried into cracked mosaics. Seedlings sprouted unprompted where kitchens once stood, as though the river were apologizing with green peace offerings. But a new opportunity rushed in on the receding tide. The Peruvian government, eager for post-pandemic revenue, announced expedited licenses for ethno-psychedelic wellness centers. Investors drooled at the phrase. A Miami venture firm offered to bankroll 10 luxury lodges complete with infinity pools, climate-controlled malokas, and trademarked Kene Control TM integration apps. Their brochure promised the Amazon without mosquitoes, mud, or mystery. A few local leaders felt seduced by the figures, 3 times community GDP in 5 years. The council asked Yari to mediate. She paddled to the negotiation site, a floating barge wired with neon signs and blasting Andean cover songs of pop hits. The lead investor, wearing a linen suit whiter than river foam, outlined his vision on a holographic tablet. Guests would sample ayahuasca microdoses dispensed by biometric dispensers. Shamans would become experience engineers with uniforms and performance reviews. Yari listened politely, then placed on the table a small clay pot painted with the oldest Kene motif, the serpent's unbroken path. She told a story, how once a missionary tried to trap the song inside a bell, and the bell cracked. Some things, she said, shatter when sold by the gram. The investors countered with larger numbers. She countered with silence and let the river's rustle fill the gap. In the end, the project stalled. Rumor says the firm shifted to synthetic mescaline retreats in Nevada. Pucallpa kept its mud and mosquitoes, and the song remained unmetered. But tension between open sharing and guarded heritage sharpened daily. A Silicon Valley startup released a headset promising ayahuasca-grade VR journeys coded from EEG data gathered, without consent, from earlier retreats. Influencers hailed it as democratization. Shipibo Twitter lit with outrage, accusing the company of biopiracy. Legal teams filed cease and desist. In a surprising twist, global public sympathy favored the Shipibo. The startup's stock dipped and board members fled. Victory felt sweet yet temporary. New imitators would emerge. Yari convened coders and elders again, this time to draft a digital kinship license, a Creative Commons-style framework requiring profit sharing, cultural audits, and ecological giveback for any tech borrowing Shipibo intellectual property. Early adopters, including a Berlin sound collective and a Japanese AR muralist, embraced the license, proud to flaunt ethical credentials. While paperwork traveled fiber optics, the forest called for hands-on defense. Illegal loggers, emboldened by scant patrols, crept into mahogany stands upriver. Escuela Meraya, armed with drones donated by climate allies, organized vigil flights. Apprentices took turns piloting, guiding quadcopters through morning mist to document fresh clear-cuts. Coordinates were messaged to authorities, sometimes ignored, sometimes acted upon. In one celebrated raid, police boats confiscated chainsaws and escorted 10 workers out. The crew chief claimed ignorance, said he'd paid a man with papers. The papers were forged, traced to a Lima office, whose signatories appeared on campaign donation rosters. The scandal went national. Yari's apprentices uploaded drone footage to every platform, captioned in Spanish, Shipibo, and English. The rainforest still sings, "Will you listen before it's mute?" Hashtags trended, donations poured into reforestation funds. Cynics predicted short-lived outrage, but seedlings bought with that money now push green fists through ash where stumps once bled. Amid calamities and victories, personal lives persisted. Yari's niece, Marusha, announced her desire to study marine biology, though she'd never seen the sea. Scholarships appeared like stepping stones, first from the Barcelona conference, then from a coalition of Nordic museums displaying Kene textiles. Before departing, Marusha requested a baptism, not by pastor, but by plants. Yari prepared a gentle brew, enough for visions without vertigo. During ceremony, Marusha saw herself swimming through flooded city streets, guiding fish past traffic lights, teaching them to navigate between worlds. She woke laughing, tears mixing with sweat, and declared she would learn coral dialects. Nobody doubted her. Years cycled. Floods remained wild cards, but lost their power to surprise. The AI Kene model matured, alerting villages 3 days before water peaks. Smartphones chirped sacrificially, a flute tone interpreted from an Icaro, followed by evacuation routes drawn in patterns reminiscent of snake scales. Elders who once feared phones now praised them as prophetic gourd rattles. Even so, tech never fully tamed uncertainty. Once the algorithm predicted a mild season, yet a freak storm devoured 2 rice fields. Yari reminded coders no pattern is perfect. Humility is part of the design. Then the pandemic's shadow flickered back. A new respiratory virus seeded clusters along river towns. Governments toyed with travel bans. Tourism wobbled. This time, though, networks built in the first crisis snapped into action. Community radio broadcast hygiene tips alongside Icaros thought to strengthen lungs. Retired maestros recorded guided breathwork in Shipibo and Spanish. Downloads topped national podcasts. A Lima hospital, short on staff, invited Escuela Meraya healers for a pilot integrative ward. Critics cried quackery until oxygen saturation data showed patients serenaded nightly, required fewer sedatives, and reported lower anxiety. No one claimed the vine cured viruses, but its music eased suffering. The ward remains open, its windowsill lined with potted bobinzana. Mateo, the fugitive charlatan, re-entered rumors twice, once as a street healer in Manaus, once as victim of jungle retribution. Ultimately, he faded into cautionary tale status, proof that the forest spits out those who disrespect its contracts. His absence didn't end predation, but apprentices learned to smell deceit the way they smelled impending rain. On the eve of Escuela Meraya's 10th anniversary, UNESCO delegates arrived to evaluate a bid, Shipibo Conibo, song pattern medicine, for intangible heritage status. Villages painted canoes anew, children practiced welcome chants, and elders rehearsed anecdotes timed for translators. The delegates toured malokas, tasted brew, non-hallucinogenic for officials, and inspected textile workshops where artisans explained how each stitch is sung before sewn. Papers were stamped. Months later, the designation was granted. Celebrations erupted across riverbanks, fireworks arced like bioluminescent fish leaping into night. The title didn't stop floods or profiteers, but it offered a shield no investor brochure could override. At the closing ceremony, Yari stood beneath a canopy wreathed in orchid vines. She spoke about cycles, how every crisis had a twin opportunity, how every pattern invited revision without erasure. Her hair had silvered, her voice rasped, but her gaze remained river-steadfast. She invoked Ronin, the serpent still singing under satellite paths, humming through fiber cables, echoing off skyscraper glass. If you carry our song home, she told the delegates and visiting seekers, carry also a seed, plant it where you live. Let your children ask what forest used to stand there. Tell them a vine invited you to remember. At dusk, an enormous screen fluttered to life beside the Maloka, powered by portable solar banks. It streamed real-time messages from allies worldwide. Maori haka, performers danced in drizzle. Sami joikas sang under northern lights. German veterans toasted with river water, steeped in bark sent from Peru. The chat sidebar flooded with emojis, serpents, leaves, spirals, hearts. For a fleeting hour, bandwidth became a ceremonial rattle shaking continents awake. After visitors departed, the village exhaled calm. Yari paddled alone to the Oxbow Lake, where Maestro Tserkin once fished jaguar pike. Evening light painted the water bronze. She reached into her bag and withdrew the serpent tail rattle, now worn to satin by decades of palms. Holding it over the water, she asked silently whether it was time to surrender the talisman to the next current. A breeze answered, ruffling surface lines into miniature Kené. She smiled, slipped the rattle back, and whispered, "Not yet." That night, under a half-moon, apprentices prepared ceremony. No tourists, no researchers, just community. But they included a silent partner, a small suction cup microphone feeding audio to a server that would archive Icaros in lossless format for future Shipibo children. The beam indicator pulsed violet as Yari sang. Somewhere far away, rig workers huddled over earbuds between shifts. Insomniac city dwellers slowed their breath to the melody. Kené traveled as waveform, intangible yet unmistakable. When the song ended, Yari glimpsed a vision. City skylines entwined with liana, drones planting mangroves, classrooms teaching algebra in Kené notation, children referring to climate resilience as simply common sense. She opened her eyes to darkness alive with insect drones and heartbeats, and felt, more than saw, the next era cresting the bend, unruly, uncertain, but hearable if one knew how to listen. You've just journeyed from mythic dawns to digital horizons, tracing the Shipibo's Serpent song through conquest, rubber, profiteers, and pandemics, right up to the edge of tomorrow. If this story moved you, carry a piece of it into your own world. Learn the name of a plant outside your door. Question the price of the patterns you wear. Listen for songs beneath the noise. Hit subscribe if you'd like more histories that don't sit quietly in textbooks, and share this episode with someone who thinks the past is gone. It's right here, humming under our feet. Until our next exploration, I'm your taboo historian reminding you, the river remembers, and so should we. Rest well, my friend.
you.